Record. Good evening, everyone. Today, we're going to talk about survivor of domestic violence. This should be a good one. So, put your boots on, strap them up, and let's get started. Welcome to Seasoned Women's Podcast that is raw, real, and uncut. No topics are off limits. Seasoned women, we're going to make it make sense. I'm just saying. My name is Mary Dean, and I am the host for Seasoned Women and the queen of all season. My guest today is a survivor of domestic violence. Welcome to Seasoned Women, Janet.
Thank you.
I want to give you a little information about who she is. She's a survivor. You know that song? I am a survivor. That's what she is. Okay. I've known her for a little while. We were both on a panel at one time. You invited me on this panel for women years ago, Janet. So gracious, thankful, appreciate you. Janet
You're very welcome.
Janet is a licensed artist, award-winning author, a trauma educator, and speaker from Washington, D.C., now based in the Midwest. Well, how's that working out for you, Janet?
I love the Midwest, actually. I love Wichita.
Her art has been exhibited at the Wichita Art Museum, the Wilson K. Cademan Art Gallery, City Arts, and Inner Urban Art House, to name just a few. Janet's writing has been featured in Elephant Journal, Writer's Digest, and The Mighty. In 2020, Janet launched Owl Medicine Designs to provide art products and greeting cards for life's unspeakable situations. Janet holds a Master's of Fine Arts in Fiction, a Master of Business Administration, and is a Diamonds graduate of the Geological Institute of America. So just by that, you know she's a bad mama jamma. Okay? She's got it. She's it. She's it. Janet, I just want to, ask you some questions because I know that hearing your story years ago about being a survivor of domestic violence, there's so many women out here that are experiencing the same thing and have gone through the same thing. And I believe with your testimony and what you experienced would help a whole lot of women that are going through it, especially our young women today. So could you provide us with your story of being a survivor of domestic violence?
Sure. I'll keep it high level. It's a pretty gruesome story, so I don't want to trigger anybody with it. But to kind of sum it up, I was raised in an environment that was emotionally neglectful, very emotionally abusive in its own right, and experienced several sexual assaults when I was in high school. And that really primed me and put me kind of in like a perfect mental state to meet the man who I would spend 22 years with. I met him when I was 19 years old. And in when you're kind of like raised in an environment that is not healthy, and then you experience the traumas and the assaults that I experienced in high school, that mental state kind of puts you in a place where you're really ripe for someone to come and kind of like take you and put you in a place that's even worse, but doesn't necessarily seem like that. Like,
Right.
when I met him, as I said, I was actually 18. I turned 19 a couple months later, but you know, he trauma bonded me. He did things that made me believe he was looking after me or protecting me, or made me feel like I was smart and I was intelligent and all of these things, which compared to where I had been growing up, made him seem great. And then,
Can I ask you a
things.
question, Janet?
Mhm,
What is
sure.
you use the word trauma bond? What is in turn, what is that? Trauma bond.
So
That's an
trauma
interesting
bonding,
word.
trauma bonding happens when it can happen. It doesn't have to always happen between an abuser and their target, but it can
Mhm.
happen in multiple relationships. But it's where um, through a traumatic or a traumatizing experience, a bond, most often unhealthy, is formed. So in my case,
Mm.
I had a stalker at the time that I met the man who went on that I spent all the time with. And we were on a date and we were being followed. And so he says to me, like, I'm going to take care of it. And the long story short is he scared those people off and I was never followed again. And the ex-boyfriend who was stalking me at the time left me alone after that. So for the first time in my life, I felt protected. So in that moment, he trauma bonded me. He did
Mm.
something that in all of my traumas I had never experienced, feeling protected. And
Yeah.
so because he did that, he earned my loyalty like
Mm.
instantly. Because the analogy I use a lot are, and hopefully I don't offend anybody with this, but a lot of times people think like I think about dogs, right? So I had a pit bull at one point who had been abused. He was rescued from a fight ring. And one of the tactics that pit bull rings will use is they'll starve the puppies. And then the reason they do that is the moment you feed that puppy will do whatever you ask it to do, right?
Mm.
You've bonded the puppy, you've trauma bonded the puppy. So if you think about people from that perspective, if you're starved for affection, if you're never protected, if you're neglected or abused, and then someone comes into your life and they seem like they are protecting you, taking care of you, giving you affection, they're creating a trauma bond.
Good
Mm,
explanation. Thank you.
thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah. And okay, so, we're dating. He trauma bonds me. I had a conflict with my parents and I was given an ultimatum. So I left the house and moved in with him very quickly. And within about 6 to 9 months, the violence started. So,
Man, I tell you, so many women have had the same experience as you, a
oh,
trauma
yeah.
bond. I'm glad you gave it a little bit more clarification on that because a
Yeah.
lot of women they trauma bond and
Oh,
stuff,
yeah.
you know?
Mhm. Yeah, I think there's, a misnomer in my opinion. They say that, those of us who have experienced abuse that we're codependent. And I don't
Hmm.
agree with that in the majority of the cases. We're trauma bonded.
Hmm.
Something has happened to form a deep bond with the person who is harming us. And it makes it hard to overcome that and see past it and realize that your situation is hurting you.
Yeah, that's crazy, but it's true, so true.
Yeah.
So, how are you feeling emotionally about being a survivor of domestic violence?
Well, it's funny that you say that because when we use the word survivor, I was with my therapist today. I had an appointment this morning. When you use the term survivor, it implies a past relationship, like I survived this thing and I'm done. And I use the term survivor over victim because I
Mhm.
believe there's very different mentality between victim and survivor. And then you'll also hear me use the word target, that somebody was targeted for abuse. Um, just in different terminology because I think it creates a different mindset. But I was reminded today that my ex still reaches out and says harmful, abusive things. Therefore, I'm not truly done. I'm still living with
Yeah,
it.
yeah,
Um, so there's that part. But to not be physically in his presence daily and not deal with the life and death situations that I found myself in on a daily basis. There's obvious relief in that. And it's been 10 years since I left. Um, and I am very proud of the life that I have built since then. So,
let me piggyback off of that. I know that you're married, right?
yes, ma'am.
So how does your husband deal with that emotion, knowing that this abuser is still trying to contact you?
Not easily. It angers
Mhm.
him. It frustrates him. I know he wishes that he could put a stop to it
Mhm.
himself. But I don't know if you're familiar with the term like "don't feed the trolls." So online trolls, and they create all this havoc, and there's this whole thing about like, don't give into it and don't feed it. I can't speak for every man who's ever harmed somebody, but I know with mine, I believe that he feeds on the attention. And so, my husband and I have talked many times about just not feeding that.
Yeah,
So, but it's not easy for him,
yeah.
he's a man after all.
Right, right. Want to protect his wife. Absolutely.
Uh, yeah, absolutely.
So based on what you continue to endure
Mhm.
with this, I'm gonna call him a stalker because that's basically what he is. Right now, because you're not in his physical presence where he can, do you a lot of harm, but he
Yeah,
is stalking you. Are you,
sure feels that
in
way.
yeah, are you in a safe environment?
Hmm. You know, that's a hard question to answer because what my ex used to tell me on a regular basis is that he would come after me and I would never see it coming and he would kill me from a distance.
Mm,
So, which I knew, he was talking about like using a long rifle or, something like that. So, in order to leave, I had to accept my death.
mm,
And on my second date with my husband, I told him the only way he could date me was if he could understand I probably was going to die by homicide.
oh wow.
You know, so yeah, so it's like a real interesting way to start a relationship. Um, so I have gotten to a place where it I don't think about on a general day-to-day basis like, am I safe? Because
Hmm.
he's been here, he's been to town, he says he knows where I am.
Mm,
But like things like I don't generally post where I am online while I'm there. It's usually afterwards. Um, I've never associated myself publicly with my current employer. Um, and I never do. Like if you ever see an employer attached to my name, I don't work there anymore. Um, Things like that. So I take
mm.
steps to be as safe as I possibly can. But it becomes just part of your day-to-day living when you have a an intimate partner relationship that has ended, but the other partner continues to insert themselves into your life in a harmful way.
That has a lot to, I mean, doesn't that mentally, mess you up? You're constantly hearing those words because or thinking about what he says and stuff. Doesn't that mess with your mental well-being?
There was a time where now I have like 300 emails from him. Um, there was a time where getting an email from him would really send me into a downward spiral.
Mm,
Now, 10 years later, when I get them, it's not so much about the emotional impact in the same way. It's more that it's a reminder that I'm not allowed to live my life in peace.
mm.
Um, that this individual feels a sense of entitlement um, to my peace. You know what I'm saying? Um, but I was in intense therapy for 7 years.
Mm.
And I still see my therapist on a regular basis, just not weekly. Um, and I think in that time I've developed a good set of therapeutic tools that help me deal with it when it happens. Um, but is it fun? No. I mean, of course I
Yeah,
have to process it. You know what I'm saying?
yeah,
But I'm at a point where it no longer like makes me not able to function if it happens.
right. Yeah. Well, you kind of answered the next question that you are currently getting professional support or counseling to help you cope because of the impact of being a survivor of domestic violence. So,
Yes. And I believe I'll probably be in therapy for the rest of my life.
so it's
Like I
not
don't
one of
see it.
those you do it for a couple of months and then okay, I'm doing all right, but it's something that's going to be ongoing for the long term.
Yeah, I believe so, but that could change. I mean, there was a time where I didn't think I'd ever not be seeing her weekly, and then about a year, maybe 2 years ago, we moved to every 6 weeks.
Okay.
So there's definitely been a healing progression in that. So I could be wrong. I could reach a point where it's like, I mean, life isn't sterile, you know what I'm saying? Things
Hmm.
happen and things could come up where I'd seek counseling out again. But for right now, I see her on what kind of like maintenance mode, I guess is
Hmm.
the best way to put it.
Okay. Okay. Do you have a support system in place to lean on during difficult times besides your husband?
100%. 100%. I think when you come through any kind of situation where the people in your life, your intimate people in your life, have been part of what has harmed you, um, you become very selective in
Hmm.
your friendships. So I have a small group of very trusted people. I have lots and lots of acquaintances, but very, very small group of trusted friends. But I do
Yeah,
have them. So yeah.
that's good. That's good. Are there any specific triggers or situations that make you feel particularly anxious or unsafe?
Crowds. Crowds are hard for me. I don't like being touched by people I don't know. Like the one place I do not go in this city is Trader Joe's.
Oh,
Um, it is
never been
so
there, but okay.
it is so crowded,
Oh,
and the people that go there seem not to have an understanding of personal space.
hmm.
And the last time we were there, I remember looking at my husband and saying, "This person's got one more time to touch me, and I'm gonna start throwing elbows." And he was like, "You're not allowed to be in here anymore. Like, go take the keys, go to the car." um, just because, I think that has more to do with like agency. When you've been traumatized in any way, whether it's a sexual assault, whether it's being trafficked, whether it's intimate partner violence, your body becomes not your own, right?
Right.
And so situations where people touch me without my permission, um, especially frequently, are
Hmm.
not easy for me to be in. Um, I'm not good around people in general for extended lengths of time because the energy that it takes for me to regulate. Like there was a time, Miss Mary, where I couldn't be like in a public space and not be able to see all the doors and windows. So like everything is a
Yeah.
is a progression.
Right.
I remember, I think it was maybe a year ago now, I went out to dinner with a couple of friends, and one remarked like, "Do you realize you're sitting with your back to the door?" And I was like, "Oh, I hadn't even noticed." Like, yay for healing, you know? But for the most part, the biggest issue I have are just like closed in crowds at this
Yeah.
point. The rest I'm pretty okay with managing.
Yeah. That's understandable as well. Have you explored legal options or protective measures to ensure your safety?
Oh, that's always such a loaded question. I mean, I did have a protective order at one point. Here in Wichita, protections from abuse are only 1 year. I was able to renew it one time. So I got that protective order in 2019. I was able to renew it in 2020.
Hmm.
But I had to let it expire. I consulted my lawyer and was told that the likelihood I'd get it renewed again was not at all guaranteed, and that it was probably better to let it lapse, and if he reoffended, to get another one. The problem is that my ex is not a stupid man by any stretch of the imagination, and he's very good with words. And so he writes his messages in just vague enough language that I cannot use it to get another protective order.
Wow.
Um, but I know exactly what he means.
Hmm. Hmm.
Um, and with his most recent email, like as an example, the language he used made it very clear that he thinks I deserve to die, but he didn't make a direct threat. And so that prevented me from taking any legal action. So
You know, on the protect, because that's what I was going to ask you next on the do protective orders keep survivors of domestic violence safe?
not in the
And
least.
Yeah, because I know there's been several women here in Wichita
Yeah.
that have lost their lives because of
Yeah.
abusive partner, spouse, or
Hmm.
whatever, and they had protective orders.
Yep.
And it just
Um,
seems like, yeah, it just seems like the police department, unless somebody's at your door in your house, then there's nothing they can do. I just what so
right.
what good of protective orders?
Right. So it's a complex situational thing, and there are several factors to think about. The first is if a person is committed to doing you harm, a piece of paper is not going to stop them.
Hmm.
Um, but there's broad considerations to think about if you're thinking about getting a protective order for any reason. One, if you're very, very lucky and you get your protective order and the person who is harming you does not want to go to jail, they will leave you alone. Okay.
Right.
So you might be one of the lucky ones. In fact, while I had my protective order, my ex did not contact me, but the protective order is gone now.
Mm.
Um, so because when you do secure a protective order and they violate, now we're looking at, in some cases, in some states they could get jail time, in other states it's a misdemeanor. I don't remember exact. I think it's a misdemeanor here in Kansas.
Hmm.
Um, but that's, a record. And many of these people are just rational enough that they do not want that and they will obey the protective order. The
Mm.
other thing to think about is anytime you take a protective action when you are in an intimate partner domestic violence situation, you're creating a scenario that puts you in extreme risk for the next 72 hours. Okay. And so there's a lot of people, a lot of very well meaning people always say, why didn't you just leave? Or how could you
Yeah.
stay? Or any of these things. And what I think is becoming more prevalent that people are starting to understand that the most dangerous time in any relationship is when you leave. And in some cases, it's not even when you leave, it's when you make the decision to leave because your body
Mm.
language changes, the way you're interacting changes.
Yep.
And you are like, I forget the exact statistic. I want to say it's like 72% more likely to die by homicide within the next 3 days.
Mm.
And then there are other factors. Are there weapons in the home? Have you ever been strangled? Like if you've ever been choked out, you're at such a risk, like a higher risk of lethality. If there's a gun in the house, you're at a higher risk of lethality. Like all of these factors come into play, and which is why I always say, like, the woman in the situation is the expert. Like her gut should be determining. If she tells you no, I'm not going to protective order, is going to make things worse, let her be. She knows that situation. For years, I refused to get a protective order because I knew it would just make it worse. Um, and then truthfully, he finally slipped up enough where he wrote words that I could actually take to the DA and get a protective order. And I had to be escorted to my car by the sheriff's deputies. They wouldn't let me leave the building because he was being so hostile inside the room.
Oh.
He was menacing me inside the room and they made him move. And then when I went to leave, he tried to follow us. They made him go back and then they escorted me and my husband to our vehicle. Like
Mm.
both times that I had to um, deal with the protective order in this city, I had to have police escorts. So, you know, it, my ex doesn't want to go to jail. Thank you for that. You know what I'm saying? But
Right.
like right now, there's no protective order in place. So
Wow. So the next question would be, what steps have you taken to prioritize your well-being and self-care? You know,
the number one is therapy.
okay,
The
okay.
number one is therapy. Self care is something that we've turned into this hashtag self care Sunday, and
Hmm.
we self care to like go get your hair done, go get your nails done, buy that candle, and take that bubble bath. Self care is so much more than that. I mean, so the real answer to your question is the number one thing I do is I go to therapy,
Hmm.
but I also have very, very conscientious diet. I exercise every single day. Um, and when I say diet, I mean more than just the food that I eat. I mean, there are shows that I don't watch, that because they can be very triggering or just because they're too reminiscent. Like if it like there are certain shows that just give me a certain feeling that remind me of my time in that situation just because of like the tension or the stress or like I can't watch those thrillers where somebody's always like, are they gonna die or not die? You know, like I can't do that. Because like my body just can't handle that anymore. So I just don't
Mm,
watch it. There I don't
okay.
crime. I'm sorry, my dogs kind of want to wrestle with each other in the background.
Uh,
Uh, uh you know, like so I my the music I listen to, the TV shows I watch, the books I read, and the food that I eat, like I'm all very conscientious about how it will impact my mentality.
yeah.
um you know, I have a deep spiritual life. All of these things kind of go into, and I do a lot of art, and art is very healing for me, but all of these things go into like my self-care practice.
Okay. Okay. Um, so I know you say you have a small circle of trusted friends that you deal with, but is there, do you allow other people to, to support you when it comes to the issue about being a survivor of domestic violence? Do you have like support groups, or do you have like women groups that you go to do a what do you want to call listening session for or two?
I have close friends that I talk to. I used to go to support groups.
Hmm.
Um, and Wichita does an amazing job with crisis and transition. So women coming like just out of their situation, maybe they're at, you know, the shelter, they're
Hmm.
working their way through like extracting themselves from the situation and then like transitioning into stability. What there is not is really like a place to go, like for someone like me who's 10 years out. I know people that are 20 years out. I have friends in my circle who have been through the same things I've been through, um 10, 15, 20 years ago, and we talk. Um but there's no like structured place that I go
Yeah.
here in Wichita.
Okay. Okay. So I know I have a list of organizations. I'm gonna put them up because the question is, are there any resources or organizations you would recommend
Mhm.
to survivors, and I should have changed that, of domestic violence, to get more information about, how they can contact. And I'm gonna
Mhm.
put this up. And so what do you think about these particular organizations, shelters for
Mhm.
women that's in crisis?
Well, so, of the ones I know on the list, I highly recommend Harbor House. I've toured that shelter, and I wish I had been in a shelter as nice as Harbor House. The one I was in was on the East Coast, is not that great.
Hmm.
But the people at Harbor House are great. Wichita Family Crisis Center I used when I first came here. I don't know the Women's Network or
Hmm.
St. Anthony Family Shelter, Interfaith. I'm not familiar with those. Stepstone, again, that's your transitional housing here. Great program. The Wichita Area Sexual Assault Center, I've also used their services. Great program. And Catholic Charities is who runs Harbor House. I don't
Okay.
know Agape though.
Okay.
But as I said, Wichita does a tremendous job here. I commend our services here. If you're in crisis, if you're in a situation that you're trying to get out of, you need help transitioning, all of those things, I highly recommend the services here.
Okay. Okay. So what are your thoughts about creating safety plans in case of future encounters with the individual who has caused harm? It seems like you have those plans already.
For me, yeah. I mean, yeah, I definitely have my safety plans in place, and you know, have thought through as much as possible the scenarios. I think safety plans are critical in any
Mhm.
situation. Um, so you know, but like all things, the best laid plans kind of like go awry. Like I can tell you that I was actively planning to leave my situation, but when the
Mhm.
moment came, none of my plans were fully in place, and I just had to
Yeah.
leave in the moment with the clothes on my back. You
Yeah.
know, but when you can, you know, you should always safety plan, because leaving in the heat of the moment often leaves you in a situation where you're completely untethered. And the statistics show that, like, I was homeless when I left. So I left in the middle of a situation that was becoming violent. I left with the clothes on my back. I was homeless, sleeping in my car for several months.
Mhm.
Um, and many times almost went back, until I finally confided in my boss at the time, and she put me in a hotel.
Okay.
Um, because without stability, um, the temptation is to go back because it's like the devil, you know what I'm saying?
Mhm.
So, and if you think about it, if you're still alive, if you have not been, killed, you are surviving it, right? You're navigating it, you understand it, you know how to get through that day and as best as possible. And
Mhm.
so, but when then you're confronted with, systems that you don't know how to navigate, I was alone in a state that I had no family or friends, and it was very, very, very difficult. And, um, it takes a lot because I think one of the things that we as a society don't really think about is, and I've had so many people, well, at least you're free, or thank God you got your independence, or but what a lot of people don't take the time to think about is the day we manage to leave a situation is the day we lose whatever family we have at the moment, all of the relationships we understand, our
Yeah.
home, our stability,
Yeah.
potentially dreams we had of a relationship that could possibly be good or healed, or, so there's so much loss and grief tied in with the situation that to me, it makes total sense that so many women go back. It
Yeah.
takes 5 to 7 times for a woman to truly leave a
Mhm.
domestically violent situation. But it takes stability, and safety planning can help with that because one of the
Mhm.
things that to a safety plan is where are you going to be, right? And
Yeah.
so you can have a place to stay, even for a little while. Shelter
Mhm.
is 7 days. The Stepstone program is 2 years if you're accepted into it. So these are programs that can really help provide the stability necessary to help you get where you need to go.
Do you find that physical abuse is not the only abuse that a survivor of domestic violence encounters? It can be verbal abuse is just as bad as physical abuse, and mental abuse is just as bad as the verbal and physical abuse. So,
Mhm.
I tell people abuse is abuse.
Absolutely. Yeah. No, abuse is abuse, and on top of that, you can't rank it. So,
Mm-mm.
like, I mean, we're looking, we have financial abuse, reproductive abuse, sexual abuse, spiritual abuse, physical abuse, emotional abuse. I mean, all of them, they're all abuse,
Mm-hmm.
but also generally, like, you can't, like, physical abuse is not going to happen without emotional abuse, right? Because if a man or a woman, women do it too.
Right.
But
I
if
was
your
gonna say the same.
partner,
I was gonna
yeah,
say
women
that.
do it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Absolutely. Women have different tactics. It's
Right.
rare, it's more rare that a woman is physically abusive.
Mm-hmm.
But women
Mm-hmm.
have different tactics that are just as abusive. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
but if your partner, you know, oh, I lost my train of thought. But yeah. Oh, I know what I was gonna say. So if your partner comes at you physically and they haven't been wearing you down mentally, you're gonna leave. You know what I'm saying? Like, you're not gonna take it. So
Right. Right.
to a point where you're,
Right.
like, living through that abuse and, like, enduring that physical abuse, you've been worn down mentally, whether it was people before situation. Because when you meet someone and they're at their end, that's
Mm-hmm.
not their first trauma, that's their worst trauma. But that's
Right.
not their first trauma, or they wouldn't be
Right.
in that situation.
That's right. That's right.
So, yeah.
So my last question is, are you affiliated with and I don't think I think you answered that, with an organization for survivors of domestic violence. I think you kind of
Not at
answered
this
that
time,
one.
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, no,
Yeah.
not at this time. So,
Okay. So these organizations, I know the National Domestic Violence Hotline, they said it's
mm,
24 hours. I know when I was with Black Women Empowered in Wichita, uh, we had a young lady that called us. She had had a child that left her abusive situation. We met her at a Quick Trip out
mhm.
on 96 because somebody had taken her and dropped her off there, her and her son. And she was trying to get help from various shelters. And do you know that they told her that they would be willing to help her, but she could not bring her child?
Well, I find that really hard to believe. Like that
She
doesn't make
could
a lot
not
of
bring
sense.
her child, and that's been several years ago, Janet, but she could not bring her child. They told her that if she could have a DCF come pick her child up, they could take her in. And so, if anybody knows anything about DCF, when you turn your child over to
Yeah,
DCF, you might not see them or her or him for a long time with all
right.
the different procedures and policies and processes that you have to go through. And I just
Yeah,
found it so disheartening to
yeah.
see this mother, say that she cannot and will not be separated from her child to get shelter for herself.
Yeah, I find that very surprising. I mean, I don't know enough about what I know of the policies of our local shelters have more to do with the fact that there's a rating of lethality. Like they have to look at the lethality of your situation. Um, which is unfortunate because you could be trying to get out of an emotionally abusive situation,
Mhm.
which is not by definition going to meet the qualifications of the lethality matrix.
Right.
So you will be denied a bed.
Yeah.
Um, but emotional abusers can become physical abusers. I mean, there was a woman here, I can't remember her name, but she was killed. So, like, if you go on those awareness walks that they do, like the Purple Mile,
Hmm.
I'm sure her picture is there. But the thing that struck me about her, I can't remember her name right now, but there had been no physical violence in her history. It was all emotional, and then she left, and he killed her.
Hmm.
So, like, there was no history of physical violence, so she
Hmm.
probably would have been denied a bed in a shelter
Wow.
because she wouldn't have met the lethality criteria, but yet he murdered her. So, there's a lot that's wrong in
Hmm.
and not the way I'm not saying our crisis services,
Hmm.
but,
Hmm.
like, nationally, the way that we look at domestic violence, one, we don't treat it like the health crisis that it is. I have lasting physical damage from 22 years of violence.
Hmm.
My medical bills over the last decade are astounding that are directly related to what I endured. I'm partially blind, like all of these things. Like
Wow.
I have
Yeah.
medical problems that I'll live with for the rest of my life. And we don't, nobody asked y'all to talk. Uh, they're like, we want to
Uh,
do this. Um, and so these are all things that, you know, I can't speak to that situation. I think that's tragic. I don't
yeah.
understand why anyone would ever say you needed to separate a mother and child in an abusive situation.
Hmm.
But what I do know is that it when you look at our crisis services, like there are constraints on how they can get grant funding and what they can do with the beds that they have, and it doesn't address the underlying problem. Like we're always talking about, domestic violence, but what we're not talking about is the sense of male entitlement that makes men believe they can do this to us,
Yeah.
that they have a right to do this to us. And
Mm.
conversely, those women that do abuse, they have a sense of entitlement too, that they have a right to harm another person. That is where the issue begins and ends, that sense of
Hmm.
entitlement. And,
Hmm.
and we're not doing anything to truly address that.
I
And as
tell
long
you,
as we're not addressing that, this is going to continue.
continue. It's a
Yeah.
repeated cycle over and over again. Oh, it's just so crazy. Well, Janet, I'd like to thank you for being my guest and sharing your story with us on Seasons Women podcast. It's great. And I hope that, someone that is going through what you have gone through and can survive it, well, this will help them as well. So thank you so
I
much.
hope so.
I
Thank you.
appreciate
Thank you
you.
for having me.
You're absolutely welcome. Have a good day.
Thanks. You too.
Bye bye.
Bye bye.